we never know the world out there. We never know it. I mean, I say, I'm looking at a tree out my window. I'm having the experience of a tree outside my window. I see a green leaf. What is green? There's a photon coming, and photon is just a concept, by the way. There's a photon coming from the leaf to my eye, which triggers electrical impulses, which the brain translates as green, and the activity of greenness appears in my consciousness. There's no green out there. When we look at the leaf, I go down in a micro, there's atoms, most of which are empty space. What are atoms? They're just like waves in something we don't know. There's actually, the more we look at it, the more science finds there's actually nothing there. There's no thing there.
Peter Russell, welcome to Beyond Meaning. This is a privilege and an honor, and also a joy to speak with you. I was brought to your work through what you've said about consciousness, the way you've brought non-dual teachings of ancient times in contact with modern science. And you've had also a very interesting life. You've studied in the halls of Cambridge. You studied mathematics, physics, and psychology there. You've studied under Stephen Hawking. And also, you've studied in India under Mahesh Yogi. So, and then you've come back, you've integrated what you've studied, you've done pioneering research on meditation, studies on meditation. And you've written a lot about consciousness, our global consciousness, our global evolution of mind, and a lot of other really interesting things that I would love to get into. But for those who are not familiar with your work and your journey, would you introduce the path your life has taken and the kind of work that you do and your main interests?
Great. Yeah. And also just thank you very much for having me on. I'm just really looking forward to this conversation. We're going to have a good time. Yes. Well, you mentioned Cambridge. I mean, at school, I was fascinated by science and mathematics, but particularly mathematics. And so I got a place at Cambridge, which was a great honor to study mathematics. It's probably the best place in England to study mathematics. And as you said, I was with Stephen Hawking for a while. And then I got to a point where I realized however much maths or theoretical physics I do, there was a question of why am I here, a conscious being doing the maths? It's like, this is a strange thing. I mean, we think how the universe started from, elementary matter, hydrogen, and which evolved into other chemical elements, evolved into life. How come, the way I put it, how come hydrogen has evolved into a being that can now do the mathematics of hydrogen? It's like, what's happened here? Basically, why am I conscious? There's nothing in science that explains why I am conscious. In fact, science would be much happier if I weren't conscious in a strange way, because consciousness is a huge problem for science. And yet, paradoxically, most of science takes place in the mind, the thinking, the theorizing, the drawing conclusions. I mean, the experiments take place out in the world, but most of it takes place in the mind. And that struck me as like really weird. And so, as you mentioned, I moved on. I thought I might study philosophy instead, but philosophy at Cambridge, as I put it, was really the study of dead philosophers. It wasn't doing philosophy. I wanted to get my teeth into philosophy. So instead, I thought I'd do experimental psychology as an understanding of the brain. And I learned a lot, but they weren't interested in consciousness, hardly came up at all. And I realized the way to study consciousness is not putting electrodes on the brain. The way to study consciousness is inwardly. Consciousness is a subjective experience. So it needs a subjective experimentation, exploration. And the people who've done that are the great saints, yogis, adepts, people who've gone on retreat, whatever. The people who've actually turned within in meditation or some other practice to look at their own mind. And so that led me into meditation. And as you said, I got involved in TM initially and went out to India and studied with the Maharishi. And that was really the turning point, because from then on I realized that the exploration of consciousness from a first-hand perspective was what I was really interested in. And so my life since then has been in that direction, exploring consciousness, what is consciousness, how we can become more aware, the impact of awakening on society, those sorts of things.
One of the parts of your journey that's really fascinating to me is your time with Maharishi, because in my life, but also I think this also applies to many other seekers who many of us are reading spiritual texts, maybe listening to talks, practicing some sort of practice. And then we have this ideal that is presented in the text in certain figures. Let's say we can have the Buddha or some saint or whatever, but it is never, or at least very rarely, a living example of somebody who embodies these virtues and attitude. But Maharishi is known to be the real deal, essentially, a living embodiment. And so what was it spending time with him, and what did you learn during that time?
It was probably the most important time of my life. So much of what I have to share these days, 50 years on, comes from that time. First of all, I would say I would agree he's dead now, a living sage. And for me, what struck me, he was talking from first-hand experience. He was describing enlightenment, higher states of consciousness, whatever you want to call them, from his own experience. And, I'd read other teachers and actually studied with some other teachers. And for most of them, it was secondhand. They'd done lots of studies, read all the right books, listened to other teachers. And what they were saying, nothing wrong with what they were saying. It was all, to my mind, on track, most of it. But I could tell it wasn't coming directly from their experience. And that's what impressed me about the Maharishi. He was talking from how it was. So he was like talking about enlightenment, trying to describe to us what it was like. So that was profound. What I learned, I did a lot of meditation, and that was really important. But more than that, I think two things I learned there. One was that there was something to spirituality after all. As I said, I started off as a mathematician, scientist. I'd rejected religion when I was a teenager. I just thought religion was just a weird lot of outdated, mythological ideas from thousands of years ago that had no relevance to contemporary life. And so I completely rejected religion. And I think one of the things I realized in India was, hang on, there is something to religion, not to the surface side that we have today, but realizing all religions, all the great religions, came from the same basic spiritual awakening. And from then on, my life has been really understanding what is the nature of that awakening. What is the nature of that awakening? And that lies behind all the traditions. So I suddenly became open to seeing what is the underlying truth of all the great spiritual traditions. And a lot of my work has been trying to really distill that in ways that are understandable by contemporary people, now in 21st century language, not the language of 1,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago. So that was really a turning point. And connected to that, seeing that most of the problems we face in the world, whether it's our personal problems, societal problems, environmental problems, so many of them come down to human thinking, maybe human greed, human ignorance, human love of power, whatever. But human consciousness is part of it. If we're talking about, the ecology, the environment, okay, there's a lot we need to do in terms of how can we repair the environment, stop the damage, etc. But the bigger question is, what is it in our consciousness that allows us to let these problems happen in the first place? And nobody's attending to that. They're attending to the problem, but not attending to this underlying cause, this underlying aspect, which is the human mind. I think in brief, you call it the human ego. And so I saw that what was really important for the world today was, how do we raise human consciousness, or more, another way of putting it, how do we help people step out of the sort of egocentric, self-centered, greedy mode of consciousness that's behind so many of our problems.
Yeah. And I really want to explore this with you, because you communicate ancient wisdom in a way unlike anything I've heard in other places, really. But before we explore that, I just want to again return to that period of your life with Maharishi.
Yep.
Because it doesn't happen every day I speak with somebody who's had that experience. Other than the teachings and explanations and the philosophy that he delivered, is there any anecdote or experience with him that you remembered that in some way demonstrated his embodiment of what he has attained?
Let me think. It's funny. The experience that comes to mind is not actually directly answering your question, but it's something that's stuck with me. In the middle of the course, the time with him, I was there for 3 months. We were doing more or less 24-hour meditations. He wanted us to really taste deep meditation. And so we'd be meditating for 2 or 3 hours and maybe doing a bit of yoga, going back into meditation. And at one stage, we were doing it 24 hours. And I remember in the meditation hall about 2 o'clock in the morning, one morning, he came wandering by, looking in the windows to see how we were doing. And I thought, what an interesting thing. It's like something about his caring for what was happening, his caring, his overseeing. He was like, I really felt I was held in his embrace almost spiritually. And any questions we asked, he would go deep, deep, deep into explanation and understanding. That's not a direct thing of his embodiment, but just strikes me as something that I noticed was the care he had for us students.
And it is what has come to be known transcendental meditation that you were practicing there, correct?
Yes, yes.
Could you talk a bit about transcendental meditation, the principle of it and the practice?
Right, yeah. And just a bit of background, the transcendental meditation was what the Beatles started doing in 1967, and that's what got me interested. So when people talk about TM, they talk about the Beatles meditating. That was what the Beatles started doing. So yes, I got interested in meditation, transcendental meditation. I found a book of the Maharishis called The Science of Being and Art of Living, and I read it, and he was saying the opposite to everything else I'd heard about meditation. I'd already begun exploring meditation a bit. I'd looked at Buddhist, Tibetan meditation, and also some Theravadan meditation techniques, and read a bit of Buddhism, and also, read a bit from some other Indian teachers. And all of them were saying in one way or another, you need to control the mind. You need to put effort into meditation. Meditation is difficult. You need to work at it. It's hard. It takes control. And he was saying something completely different. He was saying, first of all, control gets in the way, because what we're looking for is how to allow the mind to become quiet. If you put effort into it, the very act of putting effort or control is keeping the mind tense. The mind's not relaxing. So he said any effort is actually stopping you or preventing you really dropping into that inner state of stillness. And he was saying that the mind will, if we begin to let the mind relax, it'll naturally quieten down on its own. And I thought, this is so different from what everybody else was saying. I had to try it. That's what led me to try it. TM, as many people know, TM know, it involves the use of mantras, which are very common in Indian teachings, which are basically just sounds. Some of them have meaning for people, some not. But it's used in a very, very different way. Usually mantras are used, in India it's called mantra yapa, which is like the repetition of a mantra. You repeat the mantra, you focus on the mantra, or maybe it has meaning. He used mantras in a very different way. Again, not focusing on them. The idea was just to let it be there as a sound right in the back of your mind, very quietly. You weren't saying it to yourself. It was more like you were hearing it very quietly in the mind. And you would just let your attention be with it, but not try to focus on it or keep it there. As just, as he called it, a vehicle for the attention, by which means somewhere to put your attention, because our attention is normally off on some thought, some experience, some feeling. Probably 100% of the time for us, most of us, our attention is either on what we're looking at, what we're hearing, what we're thinking, what we're feeling. And his idea was we need to turn the attention inward, 180 degrees inward. And so we just place the attention on this very faint sound of the mantra, without any meaning in TM. And the mind would then naturally just begin to quieten down, and the mantra would get fainter until in the end it had gone, and you were sitting in silence, mental silence, which he called the transcendental state. One had transcended, which means to go beyond. One had transcended conscious thought or any thought. One was just sitting there in a state of quiet.
Okay, so this is very interesting to me. I don't want to get too technical for viewers that perhaps won't appreciate it, but recently my relationship with insight meditation, Vipassana meditation, was shaken by my encounter with Krishnamurti, Jiddu Krishnamurti, the punk guru, the anti-guru, who is very much a proponent of what we would call open awareness meditation, but he would be very much against even that label, which is simply awareness of what is within awareness. And he is strongly outspoken against using any meditation object, since in his view this narrows down the mind rather than, in a sense, hypnotizes the mind.
Right.
But it does sound to me like what you've just described is a sort of mixture of more or less somewhat concentrated practice leading to a sort of open awareness where there is no need for that active concentration.
Yes. I actually remember listening to Krishnamurti, going to some of his meetings way back in the 1970s.
Wow.
And didn't understand him at all. Didn't get what he was. Now I realize, he was saying I wasn't ready for him. I would say it's very close to that. And you say concentration, it really doesn't involve any concentration in terms of trying to hold the mind. One is not trying to hold the mind to the mantra. It is just that open awareness but instead of being open awareness to your experience, which I totally understand is a very good practice, it's still, when you do that, it's easy for the mind to get distracted. Like now in my open awareness, I can hear somebody using something in their garden, some equipment. It's very difficult just to have that open awareness of that without the mind going, what's he doing? Is this affecting the recording? My mind will get into things.
Yeah.
So that's why, just that very faint, it's like, it's hearing the mantra rather than saying it. That's the big difference. It's like open awareness, but instead of opening awareness to your experience here in the world, it's just open awareness, basically towards the stillness. And of course, you can't concentrate on the stillness, because as soon as you do, the mind gets active again. So yeah, I would say it's very, very close. Yeah.
Okay, and after you engaged with this practice and had your period of intensive meditation, what within this experience made you feel that this is so important for our modern civilization, for modern science, and for the future of religion as well?
Right. Yes. Well, I think basically what I was saying is the two things. One, realizing that so many of the problems in the world come down to the fact we're caught in a very limited, self-centered mode of consciousness, and how important it was to help people free themselves from that. So my work, really, since then, I came back, I started teaching meditation. I opened a meditation center in Cambridge. I went on to do PhD research in meditation. That led me to write my first book on meditation, the TM technique, because even then I realized a lot of people were misunderstanding what TM was. And so I wrote the book in order to try and make things clear. So it really started me off on that whole path of exploring meditation, but also exploring this thing I mentioned about what is the underlying essence of spirituality. Because, people say, well, this teacher says this teacher says that religion says this, which one is right? It's like, on one level, none of them are right, because they're missing the deeper truth. And on another level, they're all correct, because I think they all come from that same fundamental realization of, if we connect with our own inner being, our own essence, with that own stillness, that then basically changes our life, changes how we think, how we work, how we interact with people. It comes from that greater inner freedom and not being caught up in the ego.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what is really curious for me is that what you've just described, being in touch with this inner stillness and quiet, does not sound like something you would expect from a physics and mathematics graduate from Cambridge to be talking about. And yet you did end up relating this very directly to the state of modern science and culture. So could you say a bit more about the scientific work that you've done, informed by these experiences through meditation? Hey there, Simeon here, and this is just a quick break to thank everyone who is supporting my work. These days it's getting harder and harder to make it on YouTube. You have to chase trends, chase sponsors, or edit videos in a dopamine-inducing, algorithm-optimized way, which is none of the things that I try to do. I try to explore the most important, deep, and often difficult questions about life, reality, consciousness, and I try to deliver them in the most meaningful and beautiful way I can manage, which takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and I don't rely on AI to do it for me. If you enjoy this work and if you'd like to see it continue, you can help me out through Patreon, YouTube memberships, or through PayPal. There are benefits to subscribing to my Patreon and YouTube members program, however, as you gain access to our community events, and also you'll be able to submit questions to people I interview on the podcast. Thank you again for spending your time here with me and with this work. And now back to the video.
The more I sort of looked at consciousness, the more I saw that the current scientific approaches to consciousness, and they're more sort of, then, first of all, the sticking electrodes on the brain, which I said doesn't tell us anything about consciousness. But they treat consciousness as something which comes out of the brain. The brain creates consciousness. And that worried me for a long time. I felt there was something wrong with this, although there was a lot of evidence for that. If you damage some part of the brain, the experience changes. An anesthetic, will stop consciousness almost totally. So it seems the brain is intimately involved in our experience. But then I realized there was a fundamental assumption here, or a confusion, that they assume that the brain therefore creates consciousness. I would say the brain determines what appears in consciousness. The brain, if you like, fills the consciousness with experience, but it doesn't necessarily create consciousness. If you say it creates consciousness, you get into a whole load of problems. Like, how does something as immaterial as just squishy nerve cells ever give rise to inner experience? And I saw part of the problem is actually in the word, because in English, the word consciousness is a noun. And in English, when you add N-E-S-S to the end of a word, you're basically taking an adjective and turning it into a noun in order to talk about it. So, you say soft is an adjective. Softness is a noun we use to talk about being soft. And it's the same with consciousness. Consciousness as a thing doesn't exist. It's a way of saying it's the state of being conscious. We are all conscious. It's that state of being conscious and seeing that is always there, and then beginning to trace that back. I see I love dogs. To me, a dog is a conscious being. I mean, I say to people, if they say dogs aren't conscious, I say, well, why would you give it an anesthetic if you want to operate on it, if it's not conscious? I mean, clearly, where do you go? I would say, fishes are conscious. I mean, where do you draw the line? As soon as you draw the line, you have to say, how come below the line, I might take a silly example, you say, a spider's conscious, but a fly isn't. Well, what is the difference between a fly and a spider? What is it the spider has that means it suddenly becomes conscious? The point is, you cannot draw a line anywhere. And so you have to take the view that the actual subjective experience, being conscious, is universal to all life. Now, that was strange when I first started putting this idea out. I mean, some philosophers talk about it. I mean, in philosophy, it's called panpsychism, or panpsychism is one version of it, which means pan-psyche, everything has mind. Now, in the last 10 years or so, more and more scientists who are exploring consciousness are coming round to the idea that the brain doesn't actually create consciousness, that it is already there. Everything has a subjective side. We have we have a much more complex consciousness than a fly, because we have other senses, we have whatever's going on. But a fly still has that somewhat inner experience. It is probably seeing where it's buzzing around and things. So that was the shift for me in consciousness, is seeing that it is a universal phenomenon throughout the universe. It is something absolutely fundamental. And that is what so many of the spiritual traditions, the mystical traditions, are saying, is that consciousness is a fundamental aspect of the universe. So that began to bring the two together for me, seeing that's what spirituality was really talking about, or one of the things it was really talking about.
Okay, and to be clear, what you mean by consciousness being fundamental is not that just any life form, due to some processes, would have consciousness, but that consciousness is pre-existing. We can compare it to space or time, whether there is a living organism or not, and then living organisms become means to producing certain forms of conscious experiences.
Right. Yes. Being conscious, as I say, the word consciousness is difficult because it immediately puts us into thinking about something. Being conscious is a fundamental quality of the universe, and as it's there in everything. But as creatures, as they get more complex, I'm going to tell you, a bacterium doesn't have a nervous system, but we can't say it doesn't have some faint glimmer of consciousness, maybe, a millionth or billionth of hours. But as life has got more complex, as nervous systems have got more complex, so what appears in consciousness has gotten more and more complex. So what has evolved is not experience itself. What has evolved is what we are experiencing, what we are conscious of.
This is fascinating, and to me, what makes it even more fascinating in your case is that you've had a life where you've studied under Mahesh Yogi, you've listened to Jiddu Krishnamurti, and now you have experienced the AI revolution. In fact, you have an AI chatbot
Yes.
containing all your written material and talks. So in light of this totally new event in the history of humanity, do you have any thoughts on AI and consciousness? If consciousness is fundamental, would you say only organic life is that it occurs only through organic life, or would you say that ChatGPT or your AI chatbot, in fact, somehow channels consciousness as well?
Simple answer, no, but with a big proviso. First of all, I don't think AI is alive. It's a very, very good simulation of human intelligence. I would actually say, for all practical purposes, it is intelligent. We call it artificial intelligence. I prefer simulated intelligence, but what Turing, the mathematician who thought about computers years ago, said, if you put, a human being behind a screen and a computer behind the screen, could you tell the difference? And I think these days, if you get something written by a person, something written by ChatGPT, it gets quite difficult to know which is the computer, which is the human being. So for all practical purposes, I would say, yes, they're intelligent. But it isn't a living system. It is a crystalline system. Basically, it's full of little tiny silicon chips, which are basically not even a carbon-based life form of any sort. It's a silicon system with other chemicals. Its level of integration on that level is, I would say, much simpler than even a bacterium. So even if it did have some sort of silicon-like consciousness, I think it would be extremely, extremely small. And of course, there's no way we can test for consciousness. That's the interesting thing. I can't test for your consciousness. You could be a robot, a very good robot here.
Yes.
AI simulation.
I promise I'm not, but of course I would anyway.
It always says that. I mean, yes. So there's no real test, except I often say, a test of consciousness would be, could an AI be telepathic? Could it actually? I think most of us know we've had some sort of telepathic experiences with connections with people, close people. Something happens. We know what's going on at a distance, other times in other spaces. If a computer started doing that, telepathy seems to involve consciousness. If a computer started knowing without any information, what was happening somewhere else or whatever, then I'd get interested. But for now, I don't. It's not conscious. It's not conscious. I don't think it has a subjective experience. Its level of consciousness is way, 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 way down the scale. Way down. Not to say that's what I say. I can't say it has nothing at all, but it's, as we know consciousness as having a subjective experience, there's no reason to think it does.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, that was really interesting what you said. Again, something I would never expect to hear from you. That the fact that we wouldn't expect AI to have any telepathic phenomenon going on would indicate it's not highly conscious, at least. Right. So it is very interesting when somebody mentions telepathy or telepathic, it is usually away from serious scientists, because you don't want to get stoned for saying things like that. But I mean, we've all had experiences when where somehow we seem to have some glimpse of information that we shouldn't normally have. Jung spoke a lot about synchronicity, about dreams relating information in different ways. And so when you say that telepathy is somehow connected to the fundamental nature of consciousness, do you mean, and we can get a bit Jungian here, that on some level our different streams of consciousness are interconnected so that information could flow unhindered by space and time, but within somehow that medium of consciousness?
Yes, I'm cautious about saying how it happens. I mean, I'm cautious. Jung put forward a very nice model in terms of the collective conscious and the collective unconscious. It may be like that, whether the streams interact. To be honest, I don't know what's going on. And I don't think anybody else really knows what's going on in this realm. But I know, as you said, most people know, I've had experiences which are beyond any rational explanation, and show there's something else going on in the world beyond the physical world, what science knows. I'm pretty sure of that. I may be, totally deluded, but I'm pretty sure of that in my own experience. How it happens, people say, oh, it could be this or it could be that. I'm always careful about getting into explaining what is going on. Because I think the likelihood is whatever theory we come up with is probably wrong.
Yeah. And speaking of theories, I want to backtrack a bit. Now we've covered the ground of that consciousness might as well be a fundamental characteristic of reality. If we go with this, what changes in our scientific outlook and in our culture would this result in? Why would this be important?
One, it leads to respect for all beings. That it stops us thinking that human beings are special. I mean, we're different. We have certain qualities that other creatures don't have. But it stops us thinking like we are special. We are different from the rest of the life. We are we see ourselves as part of the web of life, this interconnected web. And we're interconnected physically in various ways, and we seem to be interconnected psychically in various ways. So it takes us off this pedestal that, human beings are the cream of evolution or not. We're just beings who have, can do science and explore things and think clearly, but we're also realizes, we're cutting ourselves off from a lot of experiences. I mean, I mentioned dogs. When my dog, I don't have a dog now, but when I was with a dog, I knew it seemed to know things that I wasn't aware of. It had more of an intuitive sense. Just I won't go into details, but I realized, it has experiences, has knowledge that I don't have, because our minds are so cluttered up with thoughts and ideas and feelings and all that stuff. Our minds are so cluttered. It's when our minds are quieter and we come back to resting in that quieter state that I think the intuitive things happen more. So that's one thing. It also, saying that consciousness is fundamental doesn't actually change any of science. All that science has discovered about the physical world still holds true. All of mathematics, theoretical physics, biology, whatever it is, that's all true. It doesn't actually change anything. It just, in a way, completely inverts things. So, because in the end, I mean, another part of this is realizing that everything we know is in consciousness. All my ideas, my experiences, all of science is all happening in consciousness. So again, it makes consciousness fundamental in that way, because all I ever know is what is appearing in my consciousness, what my brain is creating in consciousness.
Well, one thing that has been a big event or leap for me was this whole business of non-duality.
Yeah.
Because for a long time, the major discovery in my, let's say, meditation journey was that all of these things that I experienced, that I am, suddenly I realized that these are experiences within consciousness. And so, in a sense, I am the witness of these things. In a sense, they are here, whether they're internal or external, they're all within the witness.
Yeah.
And then it became a big mystery to me what all of these non-duality people were talking about, because I can see the witness and what is being witnessed. So how do you get from the point of being the witness, being that consciousness, to the point of, well, there being no clear separation between what is being experienced and the experiencer? Before I invite you to answer, I will give you my field notes and how far I've gotten.
Okay.
And for me, the big revelation came actually through applying Krishnamurti's approach to open awareness. The big revolution came when I noticed that this witness, this, selfless self that is observing all of experience, is itself a mental construct.
Yes.
So it exists within the flow of experience as a thing that the mind constructs in order to order things.
Yeah.
And if you go beyond that construct, in fact, you don't go beyond it, because once, it simply dissolves, there is no longer any you to go beyond it. There is simply experience, the flow of experience. So this is my current progress report. What have been your observations on this?
I would say I'm in very similar place, very similar understanding. Yes. Well, first of all, non-duality, it's often misunderstood. People say, oh, it means we are all one, we have to go beyond male, female, different species, whatever. That's one but that's a very superficial interpretation of non-duality. And it's not what non-duality means in spiritual circles, like in Dzogchen in Buddhism or Advaita in Indian traditions. Advaita, literally translated, means not two. But it doesn't mean to say everything is the same, or everything is one. I go back to one of the very first writings, or it wasn't even a writing, but teaching on non-duality in the Upanishads, where this father, the teacher, is teaching his son. But anyway, what he says is, you see this pot made of clay. Now all pots are different. They're actually different pots. They're not the same pot. Many different pots. They have many different shapes and sizes. So there's a whole duality of pots. So there is duality, but it's not just duality. That's the Advaita, not two. It's not just duality. There's also, all the pots are made of clay. Every pot is made of clay, and that is common to them. And then he makes the point that the clay doesn't change its nature by becoming a pot. The clay is clay. It can take many different forms, but it hasn't changed its nature by becoming this pot or that pot. And so the teaching is, basically what you're saying is, all our experiences, everything we experience, is in consciousness. It is a conscious experience. What is common to them all is being conscious. But the being conscious doesn't change by becoming this thought or this picture of a tree or whatever. The being conscious doesn't change. That is always the same. And that's what we touch when we go into that deep state of stillness. There is just that sense of being here, just as you put it. I don't even like the word witness, because that implies there is some body, something experiencing. There is just pure experiencing without an object of experience. And so when we come to that state of stillness, we are, okay, words don't work, but we are we are in the knowing of our own knowingness, of the pure beingness of consciousness. So that's what non-duality is saying, is that, yes, all this is different, and underneath it is all an experience in consciousness, and the consciousness is always the same. And so it also means that my consciousness is the same as yours. It doesn't mean that my experience is the same as yours. You've had a very different life. We have totally different experiences. But how it is for me when I go beyond all my thoughts, my sense of who I am, go beyond all that to just that pure sense of being, that must be what it's like for you. Because there's no form to that consciousness. There's nothing to distinguish it for me. And it's always the same for me when I touch into that. It must be the same for you, and must be the same for all other people. So when I know that deeper sense of being, that stillness, I am knowing you as well. I'm knowing what it's like for you in that deeper state. I'm knowing every other human being in a way on that deeper level. And so that in a way is, people talk about universal consciousness. For me, that is a universal experience. That state of stillness is a universal experience where we all experience the same.
There are so many interesting directions where we can take this. But first, perhaps, concerning this passage from the Upanishads that you mentioned, I think the conclusion of it is that the father tells the son, you are that. That is
Yes.
Atman, the essence, and you are that. And this, we may say, is the concluding remark of the Upanishad, the ultimate statement and conclusion of the Upanishads. And then comes the Buddha, who goes through a very similar process of observation, analysis, philosophy, and so on. But where he ends up is the anatman, anatta doctrine of no self. And as far as I understand it, this experience which you described, one way to interpret it is that you get in touch with the universal fundamental fact, reality, being of consciousness, which is the same for me, for you, for all our listeners and viewers at the moment. And this is the true self. This is one interpretation. And the other would be the Buddhist interpretation, which is that this is an impersonal phenomenon which arises for me, for you, for our listeners and viewers, due to causes and conditions, and then recedes again due to the cessation of these causes and conditions. And so, obviously, this is a millennia old argument, so I won't ask you to solve it in one go.
Well, I mean, I've been through this many times, debates. I don't think there's a conflict here. What I was saying, I wouldn't use the term universal self. I very much would agree with the Buddha that there is no individual self. The individual self is a construct in the mind that we construct from our experience, from many different things. It's an arising, and it goes away. So there is no self. There is no self that is experiencing. So in that state of stillness, it is not, this is a universal self. It is an experience which is the same for all of us, because we are touching into that ground of being. But for me, it's not a self. There is just experiencing, which is filled with many, many different things as we go along. So I don't see this conflict, because I see that it's in agreement with Buddha's idea of no self, anatta. That's how I see it. I very much agree with Buddha on that. Agree with Buddha.
That's good.
I think Buddha was right. Yeah.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, well, it does make sense. I do think that there is a lot of value in what in the Buddhas and in the Buddhist traditions insistence on not becoming attached to any sense of self, not the
Right.
small self and not the cosmic self even.
Right.
And I can also see how easy it is to slip into that sort of attachment to a self concept, even in very, subtle, refined states of consciousness.
Yeah, it is easy, and it's so much part of our life experience. I know one teacher who says we mustn't use the word I because I doesn't exist. Yeah, okay, I get that. But am I going to go through life, it's like, I use I in an everyday sense where I know what it means. I am hungry. I'm not going to start saying to people, there is this experience of being hungry that is happening right now. It's like, no, I am hungry. It's a very straightforward, simple way of expressing something. And I know when I say that, if I actually stop and analyze it, no, there is not actually an I that is hungry. So I think it's quite okay to use the word self in an everyday sense. Quite okay for me. And yet knowing that deep down, it doesn't fundamentally exist.
This was a big revelation to me when I encountered the Buddhist teaching of two different kinds of truths. You have ultimate truth of the no self, and then you have the conventional truth of I am hungry, and my name is Simeon. Again and again, you return to this expression that words are not the appropriate means of communicating this. And for me, a major revolution came when I was sitting in a guided meditation led by Adyashanti. And at one point, he said, now pay attention to consciousness, but don't try to understand it. And when he said that, I was initially scandalized. Like, I've spent so much time sitting here. What do you mean, don't try to understand it? That's why I'm here. But then he continued. He said, don't try to understand it. This is not something you're supposed to understand. And then this stuck with me. And gradually, I came to see that the progress for me consisted not of getting a more and more clear intellectual understanding of life and view of life, but rather learning to approach life through a different mode of experiencing altogether, which was not intellectual, but was much more, direct, a way of experiencing. And to me, this, I discovered, is probably not a shortcut, probably the only path to slipping beneath the thinking mind and connecting with that quiet of the now, of the eternal now, what is called. And so, for me, this is like switching between different modes of experiencing life.
Yeah. And I think that's also an essence of non-dualism. I mean, I love Adyashanti, what he's saying. And even then, we can easily get caught up. I mean, he says, the way I heard him say was, be aware of being aware. But then we get caught up. It's like, oh, I am here being aware that I'm aware. And it starts getting to another mind trip. It's very, very subtle. And yet there is a way of just, I love also Rupert Spira. I don't know Rupert Spira. He says, are you aware? I actually have problems with the question, the way he phrases it, but because there's a subtle duality there. Are you aware? But what he's pointing to is everybody answers yes, except some weird philosophers. Everybody answers yes. It's the one thing we know for sure is we are aware. I can doubt every experience. I could be in the Matrix right now. I can doubt all my experiences. I cannot doubt a bit being aware. And that to me is a way into it. It doesn't get us into the thinking about it, being aware of awareness. It's just recognizing it's absolutely clear. I have no doubt. I have no doubt the way I would put it, not that I am aware, because that dualistic thing going, I have no doubt there is, the way I put it, I have no doubt there is experiencing happening. There is consciousnessing happening.
Yeah.
And that takes me back. Or another question, actually, this one came from Rupert Spira, which I really like. Are you not that which is experiencing this moment right now? I like the question. It's got that sort of negative, it's almost a Socratic thing to it. But are you not that which is experiencing this moment right now? Like, when I take that question, it's like I just drop back. Well, of course I am. I am that which is experiencing this moment right now. It just helps me drop back into that. Particularly when I'm caught up in some concern or anxiety or planning or something, just to say, okay, am I not that which is experiencing all of this? Yeah.
Yeah, I think here you mentioned the duality inherent in the previous question, but I think this one that you mentioned, which I immediately felt it when you presented it, again, I can see very easily how me, before having that breakthrough into non-duality, would hear it and how I hear it today. So previously, are you not that which is experiencing this moment? Again, immediately conjures up the witness sense. I'm that consciousness which is a thingless thing, right, and it is experiencing everything. But the way I hear it now, it's much closer to what you're saying about consciousness not being a thing, but a fundamental quality that is soaked into, right, experience, not in any way separate, right, from it.
Right.
And within this stream, right, of experiences, a sense of self is somehow constructed.
Yeah. And the question doesn't take us, back to the pure beingness. It just takes us right out of where we are, what we're caught up in, and takes us back to, even though it's, oh yes, I am that which is experiencing this, there's still that level of duality and things, but it takes us from here right back to, much, much closer to what we're talking about here, much closer to it.
In your book, From Science to God, you pointed consciousness as the bridge that can unite science and religion. So that was very interesting to me. Would you care to talk about how this can lead us into some sort of union between science and religion?
Yes. First of all, I think they are talking about two very different realms, science and religion. And a lot of the confusion comes because people think they're talking about the same realm. So they think, religion is talking about the physical world and what it says. And but science is talking about the physical world. Science wants to understand the physical world. And that's its job. It's to try to understand how the physical world works. Spirituality is, I wouldn't even say understanding, but it's getting to the essence of the inner world of subjective experience. So science is discovering the nature of objective experience, the object. Spirituality is discovering the nature of subjectivity, the nature of being conscious. So they are two very different realms. That's the first thing. But they are both looking for the fundamental nature. And in that, one can begin to see their two explorations in different directions towards something fundamental. So, and once, science lets go of the idea that it can explain consciousness, once it lets go of that and allows spirituality to be the way to explore consciousness, then that I see is part of the bridge. Consciousness becomes the bridge that science is. Now we can begin to understand what the spiritual traditions are talking about. They're talking about exploring consciousness. So it's like, now there's not exactly a meeting. Let's say it's a bridge. It allows science to begin to respect and understand spirituality rather than saying, oh, it's a lot of weird mumbo jumbo which doesn't agree with physics. No, it doesn't agree with physics. Although some people try to make it agree with quantum theory and things. But I think that's a dubious step.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, it allows science and thence ordinary, everyday people to begin to respect the spiritual traditions and what they're doing.
The way you speak about science and religion as fundamentally different, let's say, dimensions of human exploration and expression, makes me think of another question that now completely mystifies me, and I would love to hear your perspective. And this is that, yeah, well, and it is that, let's say, if we start with consciousness, pure consciousness, which, let's say, this is the samadhi state of deep meditation, if we do have this fundamental reality of consciousness, which is outside of time and which is free, empty of objects, then by what laws of necessity do we get time and the objective world at all? Do you have any conjecture, at least, on why there would be the necessity of anything other than the pure subjectivity of consciousness?
Okay. This gets into deep stuff on how I see the world. Where to start? Pure consciousness is empty. But it is still there. There is fullness to it. When you're sitting there, there is a fullness to it. It isn't full of things, but it has that quality of completeness and fullness. Now, we talk about objects in consciousness. Technically, it's activity in consciousness. And I think this is it's subtle, but it's important. So this is why the analogy of the wave in an ocean is often used. You know, a wave is just, it's just the ocean taking a certain form. It isn't actually. It's a certain energy. The ocean is active in a certain way. And we see that activity as a form of a wave, but it's just activity of the ocean that's happening. And so this field of pure, whatever you want to call it, consciousness, is for most of the time, 100% for most of us, being activated by the brain. The brain is doing this, doing that, it's having perceptions, it's creating thoughts. And that activity, so the consciousness is being activated by the brain. And that activity is what we call the forms we experience. So if I'm seeing a tree, I see it as a form in my mind, but it's just an activity of consciousness. Consciousness is currently taking on this particular appearance, this particular activity. So although in essence the consciousness is formless, most of the time we know it by the activity. Coming back to the Upanishads, the clay and the pots, the clay is like nothing is happening with the clay. It is still, in that sense. As it said, it's always the same. Nothing actually happens to the clay, but the way it appears is very different according to the pot that it's in. Now, in terms of the objective world, as I say, science is trying to understand what the world out there, we never know the world out there. We never know it. I mean, I say, I'm looking at a tree out my window. I'm having the experience of a tree outside my window. I see a green leaf. What is green? There's a photon coming, and photon is just a concept, by the way. There's a photon coming from the leaf to my eye, which triggers electrical impulses, which the brain translates as green and the activity of greenness appears in my consciousness. There's no green out there. When we look at the leaf, I go down in a micro, there's atoms, most of which are empty space. What are atoms? They're just like waves in something we don't know. There's actually, the more we look at it, the more science finds there's actually nothing there. There's no thing there. I mean, one area of science is just saying there is information. There is a field of information there. And some of that information we call an electron, because it has a certain mass, things we call mass, things we call charge. Another bit of the field has a certain other quality. So there's information there. Now, what is that information in? What contains information? I would go so far as to say, if you take what various spiritual traditions are saying that the whole essence of the universe is conscious, it is a conscious thing, then the information is about this vast field of consciousness, which is different from point to point. One point of the leaf is different from another, an atom is different from another. But it is a field of consciousness. The more science looks at it, there's nothing physical there. There's no physical thing there. So let's assume then there is just consciousness. Then there is this field of consciousness out there being perceived by this consciousness here, and that field, the formless field out there, is given form through this particular being's experiencing of it. It's a hard thing to explain, but that's just, you ask me where I am. That's how I see things. It may be difficult. It's difficult to explain, but yeah.
This is fascinating to me. And also, I don't know if I'm right that this is the direction in which it takes us, but everything that you've explained, the leaf that we can both look at and we can both confirm that it is green. And then we can agree that green is an interpretation of photons. And then we can agree that photons are a concept. And we can talk about information fields. But all of this information, which we exchange by speaking, uses words and concepts. And then, so not only what we experience, but also our communication about what we experience makes use of concepts, of constructs of the mind.
Yeah.
And this also includes technical tools that scientists use to study the objective world. So if we follow this line of reasoning, perhaps it seems that it culminates in the conclusion that science is not the study of the objective world at all, but an exercise of studying what is essentially always made up of concepts. We have very similar concepts because part of the same species, very similar culture, and so on. And so would this reduce science essentially to a different mode of perhaps unconscious spirituality, a different mode of examining the interior, if we conclude that there is no exterior? Ultimately, there is no object other than what the mind perceives, what consciousness perceives.
Mm-hmm. I take your point about, science is basically exploring concepts or models. Our current understanding is models of what is out there. And all our models are based upon our experience. We say an atom or an electron is a particle or a wave, but particles and waves are both in themselves the way our minds interpret what is going on. So we are taking an experience and projecting that onto the world. I think this is where a lot of the problems come. Is it a wave? Is it a particle? It's probably neither. But because we experience waves and we experience particles, we think that is what is out there. But so I'm saying a similar thing, but slightly differently. It's more than concepts. For me, it's it's the models we have of the world. It's how we see the world. We are then projecting that back onto the world. And I think it's probably nothing like that. It's probably true to say whatever is out there is nothing like what we experience, nothing like it. So in a way, science has to say, oh, give up. I'm never going to understand the essential nature of reality. Never. I can understand how it works. I can understand how, what we call atoms get together into what we call molecules.
You can probably tell I've gotten excited. Would it then be too much to say, based on what we've been talking about, that we have no reason then to claim a world outside, a world beyond our perceptions and models, something beyond what is being experienced? I mean, on what grounds would we maintain that there is something beyond these experiences, which obviously there are laws and patterns of how we experience reality and so on. But should we really even say that there is anything out there beyond what we perceive?
I think so. My view is yes. As I say, it's nothing like what we perceive. And we may ultimately not be able to say much about it. But there is consistency in my experience. I mean, I come back tomorrow, that tree is still there. That whatever is giving rise to this experience, whatever it is, whatever is sending out so-called photons to my eye, is still there. So for me, I assume there is a world, quote, out there, but it's nothing like my experience. And I may never be able to fully know its essence, except if its essence is what we call consciousness or subjectivity. We don't even have the right words for it. Then I know its essence because I know that in myself. So when I come down to, in meditation, in silence, I am knowing the essence. I've said the essence of all people, of all beings. I'm also then knowing the essence of what is there. But but that essence is then, just as the mind is an activity, what we experience is an activity of that essence. So what is out there is an activity of that essence, and that information is about differences. I mean, information is this little point is different from this little point in some way or another, and then that is all interacting. And you could say what science is measuring is how whatever is out there interacts with itself, but it has nothing to say about what the essence actually is. Mm-hmm. Is that making sense? I know it's going to make sense to the listeners.
Well, I'm trying to make a mental construct of it, which again might just be an.
It's all we can do. It's all we can do.
Yes, which is, I suppose, the funny thing of this last few minutes of our discussion, because we have been stacking different models and concepts on top of one another in order to show how the world, at least the world we experience, is made up of concepts. And this reminded me again of Krishnamurti's instructions, who says that quietness of the mind comes upon final realization that thought cannot work with anything other than thought, that thought is locked in its own cycle of only changing forms, but only different forms of thought. And again, this takes me to that switching just to a different mode of experiencing the world, because it does seem that at some point intellectually we do hit rock bottom in terms of we do hit a limit where the mind just cannot operate with anything. It bites its own tail. And so meditation, I suppose, with all the different meanings that people give it, is a form of thinking beneath, even again, words are very misleading here, but it does open a different dimension of mind.
Yeah. I think, well, coming back to where we started, we started with TM, but, it's transcending thought. The mind is still there. The first stage is transcending thought, letting go of thought, being beyond the thinking process and noticing how it is to be without thought. And it's like, oh, actually, this is much nicer. Because with thought, there's worries, there's concerns, there's excitements, there's this and that. When you're without thought, it's like, wow, this is nice. That to me is often the experience, like to realize how much tension and stress I create with thinking. So that's the first step is to go beyond thought. So I would say Krishnamurti, I would agree with that. So, and that's why, most meditation techniques are about doing that in one way or another. But I think, what we're saying at the beginning, I don't believe you do that by trying to control thought or trying to stop thought. You need to find ways to allow the thoughts to settle down.
You introduced Transcendental meditation and its basic principles, but you're a meditation teacher yourself. In fact, your next book is on how to meditate without even trying, which is a really... It sounds really, really nice. So could you lay out the main principles, I suppose, or the approach you take in meditation and in the way you teach meditation?
Yes. I mean, it's sort of come from, years of TM, teaching TM, but also mindfulness, Vipassana practices and other things. The essence is about allowing the mind to relax and letting go of any focusing of the attention. Allowing the mind to relax is, in essence, allowing the attention itself to relax. So to start off with, just being present to your experience, as one might do in Vipassana mindfulness practices, just being present to this moment right now. And then in that, allowing the attention to come back from the experience itself and just letting it relax, letting the attention soften. And as you do that, you begin to sink back into yourself. I think mindfulness, as it's usually taught, stays at the level of being aware of your current experience. What I'm interested in more, what I try to get people to do, but what I encourage is letting the attention step back from that and noticing any ways in which some little mental tension can creep in. And when it does, not trying to get rid of it, noticing it. And as you notice it, that begins to soften and begins to dissolve. So it's all about progressive levels of relaxing the mind. And then as the mind quietens down, beginning what we were talking about before, just noticing there's this, here I am, there's this experience. And then just being with that, sitting in that quiet state. It's not about trying to reach is wrong, not about we've got to get into this pure state of consciousness. That happens. But it's more, I'm interested in how can we really allow the mind to relax, to become more still, if you like. I'm not worried about, being completely still or having experiences of no self. It's more just by doing that, by letting the mind become still, it is so refreshing, and takes out so much of the tension that we build up. As I just said, it's like when you're without thought, it's like, oh, isn't this lovely? Isn't it? I just realize how my thinking is keeping me so caught up in my head. It's like, so just to let go of thinking and enjoying how it is not to be thinking is where I want to lead people. And then that naturally goes into deeper levels.
So in a sense, it is letting the mind itself do the heavy lifting, not trying to yourself quiet or discipline or concentrate.
Right. Yeah. Yes. And also as part of it is, I see the whole thing as letting go. For me, it's about letting go. But I reframe letting go as letting in and letting be. Many people have said it's about letting be, which is part of it. But it's also, you've got to allow in the experience. So if in meditation, you're caught up in some emotion, as we often do, you suddenly, you suddenly remember how upset you were about what somebody did yesterday. Instead of just trying to get rid of it and stop the thought, you can't do that. It's there. I encourage in meditation to actually notice, okay, you're feeling upset. Feelings always have a feeling in the body. So notice what's happening in the body. Notice where there's any tension. Notice any impulse in the body. Let that come into your awareness. That is part of the present moment. It is not part of the present moment you want to get rid of, but open your attention to it. Allow it to be there. The feelings, whatever it is. Allow them in. And what you find is when you stop resisting them and allow them in, they begin to dissolve. So it's about, that's part of the practice, is when you notice something that you think is getting in the way of meditation, open to it, open to the experience. And time and again, you'll find as you do that, it no longer bothers you. I often say an emotion is it's a call for attention. And what we tend to do is take our attention away because we don't want an unpleasant experience. No, do the opposite. Give it your attention, give it what it wants, and then it'll stop bothering you. So things like that I include in the practice.
Yeah, this is actually sounds really important practically for me, because I found from personal experiences that some of the periods in my life where I would most use a good meditation are some of the periods when I meditate the least. Sometimes in experiences of extreme negative emotion, it is very difficult for me to meditate. The whole thing, there's a barrier to it. So what sort of guidance would you give for how we can approach meditation during extreme negative emotions?
Yeah. Open to the negative emotion. I mean, there's two aspects to an emotion. There's the story you are telling yourself, that person did something stupid, they shouldn't have done that, or whatever it was. That's the thought, the mental story. We can step out of that story sometimes by forgiveness, things like that, mental exercises. But the emotion starts, it comes out of the body. An emotion is the body ultimately is preparing to act in some way, to hit somebody, to run away or something. That is the residue of the body. So go to the body, always go to the body, notice, and this becomes part of the meditation. You're not trying to meditate, you're not trying to still the mind, but part of the practice is opening up to your present experience in the body. So, whereas you might sit down, an easy meditation, you open up, there's the sound of the wind, there's the sound of the birds, there's the feeling of the breath, normal everyday experience. Now you've got a different present experience. You're all wound up and tight and want to hit the person. That is your experience in the present moment. Be mindful of that. So open to that. What's it feel like when I want to hit this person? What's going on in the body? So include that. This is where your present moment, this is what is happening in your present moment, and allow it in, open to it, feel it. It's contrary to what we tend to do because we think, that's just going to make matters worse. But my experience is by opening to it, accepting this is my present moment, rather than trying to think, I can't meditate because I'm so angry and wound up. No, you can meditate, but now the actual object of your meditation, if you like, is where your awareness goes is different. It's an uncomfortable experience rather than the sweet singing of the bird.
this interaction between, let's say, mindfulness practice and actual psychological work reminds me of a question I received from a member of our audience. Consciousness being already complete now, presently, already outside of time, and ourselves already having access to it no less than the great sages of the world. How do you see this working together with the whole idea of self-improvement? One consists of sinking beneath the self, the other of building a good self, a nice self, a productive self. So
Right.
how do you see the two working together or not?
Oh, yes. So we're coming to the end. So, and this is a common question that comes up. If we are just pure consciousness and perfect as it is, how come we're such a mess? How come it's because we get caught up in, let's just say, a general sense of the term ego. Ego is self-centered thinking in one way or another. It's about how do I survive, what's safe, how do I look, whatever. But it's about thinking about me, how I am in the world, my interaction with the world. And so much of our culture reinforces that. Almost everything in the media keeps us coming back to me, how do I look, what's going on, what do I think, what's important, how am I going to make more money, whatever it is. So that underlying level gets overshadowed. We don't notice it. People talk about, we are love. Yes, I believe that. Our true nature is love. But the ego doesn't know love. The ego is self-interested. It doesn't know love. So we are caught in ways of thinking that completely shroud our true nature. And we interact with the world in a whole different sense of values of what's important. And so our inner being doesn't get a chance to really shine through into the world until, this is why meditation is important, we begin to reduce that level of egoic thinking. And as we do, we can begin to get in touch with these deeper qualities. But for most of us, we are so caught up in these personal thoughts, worries, whatever it is, what am I doing, what somebody think of me, and one thought sets off another thought, and then we hear something or we watch a movie or something else. We spend most of our time disconnected from that. It's there, not even disconnected, it's there, but we don't notice it. That's why I like the term, it's shadowed. It's shadowed by what is shaded by what is going on. I mean, an analogy I often like is, because I live in San Francisco, or I live outside San Francisco, as people know, San Francisco is often foggy in the summer because of the ocean and things. You drive over the Golden Gate Bridge and you come into sunshine. It's like you're living in the city, you just think, this is it, it's fog, I can't see very far, and yet you go over the bridge and the sunshine was there all the time. You just didn't see it because of the fog. So it's like our minds are fogged up the whole time. It's like we're living in San Francisco under the fog as opposed to north of the city in the sunshine. So it's that our whole culture wants to keep our minds fogged up with what it thinks is important.
Yes, and it seems to be working harder and harder at it.
Yes.
Yeah. Peter, you've given me a lot of your time, and so I would end only with one more question, which is again from a member of the audience. And it is a simple and direct question, but nonetheless very important, I think, which is that, well, your experience through life and also your work as well has taken you through a lot. You've seen a lot, you've done a lot, and you've thought about a lot. Considering all of this journey, if you take an eagle's eye view of life as you've seen it, what sticks out as being truly important? What would you advise a viewer, a listener currently to really consider? What aspects of life have have you seen as being truly important over time that we should pay attention to?
Yes, I think it's one word: kindness. Kindness. I mean, I think it was Aldous Huxley said he'd sum up his whole life by saying, be kind. And it's important. I mean, it's almost the golden rule of so many spiritual traditions: treat others as you would like to be treated. And so much of the time, we're seeing, we're not being kind. Let's go back. Being kind, we can be kind in terms of, helping somebody in the street or whatever it is we can be, but it's being kind to their consciousness. And I think one of a Buddhist teacher summed it up as, one way of thinking of right speech. If you cannot say something in such a way that the other person feels loved and valued and appreciated, it's better to retain noble silence until you've worked out how to say it. And so kindness for me is always having in mind, how can I love the being of this person? We all have that same inner being. How can I love the being of this person, even though they're caught up in some weird thought or whatever? How can I love them? Is like, how can I have them feel loved in any communication? That to me is the essence of kindness. How can I have them feel loved and supported? Even if I've got something very difficult I need to say to them, how can I say that in such a way that they feel loved and appreciated? If everybody was kind to everybody else, the world would be a totally different place.
Thank you very much, Peter, for all your time and your patience in digging into some really, fascinating territory, but very difficult to talk about. I think it was Terence McKenna who once said that there is a dimension of life, of experience, of reality beyond words, but it's terribly difficult to talk about it. So thank you for talking about it with me.
I think that sums the whole thing up, yes.
Yeah. So where can our viewers and listeners learn more about you, read your work, watch your work, and in general, follow your work?
The easiest place is my website. It's full of things, which is just peterrussell.com with 2 L's on Russell, not the French way. So Peter Russell with 2 L's on Russell. And there's videos, there's pages, about 400 different pages of stuff I've done, videos, essays. Some of my books are there. And as you mentioned, my bot, Peter Bot, I've loaded everything I've said or written over my lifetime into a bot. And so you can ask it questions. And I'm amazed at how good it is. It comes up with better answers than I do sometimes.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
And that's on the website. But just go to the website and everything's there. So peterrussell.com.
Thank you. I will put links in the description of this video to your website so that people can have a look at your work. And thank you again. It's been a pleasure and an honor to speak with you. I recommend people to read your book, From Science to God. It is the one that I read in preparation for this talk. Of course, you have many other books as well, but this one was beautifully written and fascinating to me. So thank you again. It was a pleasure, Peter.
Thank you. I really, really enjoyed it. I mean, it's like nearly 2 hours, but like a long one, but really enjoyed it. Time went quickly, although it was all in now.
Yes. Yeah.